Good afternoon, listeners. I'm here with Noah. Noah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me on the Q.A.C. team podcast this afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started and tell our audience who you are and what you do.
So my name is Noah Healy, and I'm an algorithm developer. I've created a new form of market system to improve how commodity markets function. And these days, I'm suing the federal government about the patent.
I saw your notes coming through. I was really intrigued by that. I was like, I can't wait to hear more about how this is going to turn out. Very interesting.
I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to turn out myself. They just filed an extension last month,
Mhm.
so when you get out of the patent system and start dealing with the federal courts, you get about 2 months, and then they get about a month, and then you get about 2 weeks, except that they asked for an extra month. So I've got to wait for January 10th to see what the state is going to do to try to defend
Gotcha.
themselves before I can bounce back uh, and and respond.
Yeah. Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about what you do as a business owner. So why'd you decide to be a business owner? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, um, basically, the way our society functions, we don't really accept ideas any other way. So it was sort of backed into it. My primary interest is actually computational mathematics and this algorithm development stuff. And I sort of built a sabbatical for myself to try to work on some of these problems, not in the expectation of coming up with some sort of, you know, economy shaking breakthrough. But that's what wound up happening. And so once I had this particular technology, I needed to figure out how to get it into general use.
Mhm.
And as far as I can tell, this is just how our society is structured. So it's sort of, from what I can tell, having talked to people who are either successful or unsuccessful, it's a lot better to just want to be successful at something than to want to achieve some specific goal. But I don't have that option, so I'm doing this.
Yeah. So, in reading a little bit in your bio there, you talked about this could possibly help the stock market. Am I correct?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so the markets that we use are structurally speaking centuries old. They predate computers, they predate the telegraph, they predate the governments of every single country on the planet. They're real old things at this point. Uh, so they were created in a time when nobody could even imagine sending a message any faster than a human being could travel. And we have been plugging machines into them for around half a century, a third to a half a century now. And so the markets are actually losing their capacity to function the way that they functioned. Well, I would say they lost their capacity to function the way that they functioned for the first 750 years of their existence so, or so.
Mhm.
Uh, and and what's important to us is that they're losing the ability to do the thing that makes it worth even having them in the first place. And so I've been able to take some of the modern ideas and technology that we have around information and information processing and create a system that is hundreds of thousands of times more efficient at processing the kinds of information that markets have to process. To give you an idea, the stock market, I have actually met the guy who at the time was operating their server farm. In order to process those orders at the speed that they have to process them to keep the throughput going, they actually can't do the legally mandated monitoring to make sure that everything's going okay. So what they do is they just have these big sort of event logs and backups. And if the SEC or some other party that's so empowered wants to do an investigation to determine whether or not at a certain time behavior was not the way it's actually supposed to be, they clone a copy the of the historical state of the computers from the backups and the log tapes, and then turn on all of the sort of monitoring and logging. And like a 5 minute session can take hours to actually run, but you can
Wow.
actually check and see that everything happened in the right order and, at the right information availability and stuff like that. Uh, so right now, they're already operating so quickly, they have to deploy these shortcuts just to stay on effectively.
Gotcha.
And that all costs us money. Uh, the information failures of the marketplace mean that people that sell commodities, buy commodities, farmers and bakers and meat packers and so on. Uh, it's getting chewed up from both sides. The,
Okay.
the the producers are selling for less and the consumers are buying for more than they would have in a more efficient marketplace. And we've seen since pretty much the 70s, late 70s, the proportion of the US and global economies that is the financial industry has been growing and growing and growing. Um, that's actually a bad thing unless the service that they're providing is getting better and better and better. And since our economy has actually been growing slower over that entire period of time, that's not
Yeah.
true. So, being able to make that system more efficient would actually cause our economy to start growing faster. And because they wouldn't have to be spending so much time on busy work and BS, the ones that were still involved could actually make more money as well.
Gotcha. So how does this tie into like real-time trading? Would it affect real-time trading?
It would effectively change what real-time trading means. So
Gotcha.
real-time is a term that again has an ancient history, in tech terms like back to the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And real-time essentially means systems that update in in speeds that are commensurate with the problems that they face. So,
Gotcha.
like, uh, a bridge isn't a real-time system because, you just go check it once a year or whatever. But if you're doing fly-by-wire, which they started, figuring out things like that, automated transmissions, some of these things had to be real time. If your automatic transmission in your car shifts gears within an hour of when it should shift gears, that's not doing you any good.
It's not any
Um,
good.
right. With computers becoming highly ubiquitous, real time came to mean instantaneous, which is not actually what it means. It actually means sort of commensurate with need. And so what we've seen happen is the marketplaces have been hyped up to computer speeds. Modern markets like the New York Stock Exchange or the very Chicago exchanges or the Intercontinental Exchange are trading frequently in microsecond speeds. So that is 1 million times a second. To put this in context, um, uh, light travels roughly 300-ish meters, or about 3 football fields, including the end zones, in a microsecond.
Sure.
Um, so humans don't really move that quickly. And most of the stuff that we're physically trading through these things actually have to get further than 3 football fields. So that's not real time. That's actually too fast. And so what we would be able to do, because this emphasizes actual human usable data rather than, this sort of market nonsense, we would be able to match markets to the actual logistical needs, which would be more on the order of one, maybe two prices a day, maybe one or two prices a week. Because, a farmer needs to farm. They don't need to be glued to a television 24/7 to see what's happening with the price of whatever they're farming. The same goes for miners or factory owners. Uh, the production is more important than the sale, because without the production, there's not going to be a sale. So the value of the sales system is minimizing the amount of time and attention it requires to get the best deal that's available.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I ran into a guy uh, probably within a year or two ago who had some real-time tracking system he was using for the stock market, and he was real-time tracking when to buy, when to sell. I thought it was pretty interesting how he had this thing put together. So I want to get your input real quick on what are your thoughts about that? Pretty accurate, not
Uh,
accurate?
well, so there are things you can do, but mostly it comes down to actually being able to run the information processing.
Hmm.
Um, the markets are generating on the order of petabytes a year. So a petabyte is the next one up after terabyte. So if you have like a 1 terabyte hard drive on your computer, if you had 1,000 of those, that's what you would
True.
fill up over the course of a
Impressive.
year. Yeah. Another way to think about a petabyte is that if the human eye is pretty accurate, but we have visual systems that operate at sort of the visual accuracy of the human eye. So, uh, sort of, 4K style video at
Hmm.
movie sized, object at 60 frames a second. Also audio, we have audio sampling that's better than the human ear, so you can't, sort of get any better than that over entire dynamic range. So if you took the entire audio visual input of a human body over 75 years, roughly a human lifespan, actually technically over 100 years, that number over a century would be 1 petabyte, roughly. So
Crazy.
every year they produce this information pile that if you did literally nothing with your entire audiovisual sensory system other than processing that pile of information for that year with your entire life, by the time you died, you might finish it. Um, is that's what's going on here. And that would be, you'd never see your parents, you'd never hear your baby wake up at like you would have no audiovisual inputs except for this information from 1 year. And that number's going up. That number's going up very, very quickly because
Yeah,
they're coming up with new ways, like, your former guy, those sorts of things increase the information flow through these systems. They're
gotcha.
actually talking about, because they don't really want people to be able to gain advantages like that. They've been talking for a few years now about developing a technology. So instead of a microsecond, which would be 1,000 nanoseconds, dropping to 100 nanoseconds,
Hmm.
which would be about a 30 meter, which would be more like, uh, you know, a part of a football field at that point,
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah,
so like the 40-yard line or something. So
yeah.
the, or, less than that, actually, more like the 33rd, 34th yard line. But that that kind of that kind of shift would not 10x the data thing, but because people would be able to sort of like, fit more things in the cracks, it would more than 10x that data load if they made that shift. And that's one of the things that holds them back. Like, we have the technology to do timing that's tight. It's just, do we have the technology to build the infrastructure for the IO to work, and the internet bandwidth and the things to support those ideas? And so that's one of those things that's driving all of these costs that's showing up at the grocery store. So
Yeah.
I see those kinds of approaches as solving the wrong problem, and doing so in ways that frequently benefit the person doing it. So it's parasitic behavior.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So you got pretty involved in this and sounds like you got pretty in depth with the knowledge and where you're headed in the direction of what this data that you're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about, did you choose this industry or did this industry choose you? Let's talk a little bit about how did you get where you are? This is interesting. It's really cool.
Well, like I said, I was actually more interested in the math problems, and
Yeah.
I was interested specifically in how communication could function on networks and how that could lead to consensus.
Uh-huh.
So, noise is a huge problem in computer science and in the actual functional application of the use of computers, because, of course,
Yeah.
they can create information or data at the very least radically faster than we can absorb it.
Yeah.
So, how do you condense that in ways that is still useful? Because there's something in there that you want, but you don't know
Mhm.
what it is. And so I was thinking about how you could configure your network to function in ways that would cause that to happen. And I found an approach that sort of aligns incentives around making that happen. And
Mhm.
then you can, people are becoming more and more familiar with AI style systems and their ability to try to solve particularly incented problems. So I was just doing, sort of theoretical work in this zone around uh, approaches to solve problems with AI or Internet of Things or network communication systems, stuff like that.
Right.
It turned out that when I applied it to marketplaces, uh, suddenly this answer fell out that was so much more efficient than what was there. And that's when I needed to do more learning, uh, and a lot of research and a lot of outreach, and start the company and start meeting people and the rest of this, to go into there. And as
Mhm.
I've gone through that, I've met a lot of very interesting and quite a few colorful people, and argued with quite a few of them, about whether, I have anything or the state of the existing system. And these arguments that I'm putting forth to you are sort of the boiled down version of that. It's the clearest explanations I've been able to find that nobody's been able to find an objection to, of where the problems are and where the solutions could be.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. So when you got started and you built this and you're plugging along here, so what are some of the challenges that you face? And talk a little bit about that one challenge that I know you're working with now that you shared with me.
Yes, yes. Well, as we were just discussing right there, one of the big challenges is actually explaining to people that, sort of the entire basis of the economy for, since the Middle Ages actually broke within our lifetimes, and now we have to fix it. And by the way, here's the solution.
Right.
That's a big lift. But that is actually getting very specific. I've been working, trying to get it through the patent office for the better part of a decade now.
Yeah, it's
And
been that long, huh? That's wow.
the full patent application was put in June of 2016.
Yeah.
Now it did take a few years, which was pretty standard at the time, and I believe it's gotten a little slower since then,
Mm,
before the examiner actually got a look at it, had done a sort of full analysis, and made a response.
mm,
And we had a year-ish of back and forth with the examiner, uh, but in late 2020, so 4 years ago now, I got a notice acceptance, and since then things have just gone completely insane.
yeah.
Um, they ignored their first notice of acceptance completely, which is against the law, actually. Um, there's a manual of patent procedure that they are bound to carry out. That's what the law actually allows them to do. And Section 1308 says that if they hand you a notice of acceptance and you pay the fee, they have to give you the patent unless they do these specific things, one of which is sign a withdrawal letter. They never did. So
Wow.
that's it. They're just
Yeah.
not allowed to do that. But in spite of the fact that they didn't sign a withdrawal letter, they still came up with an objection. That objection is a little
Mhm.
technical, but what it boils down to is that they were claiming that numbers didn't exist. They were claiming that one equals two. And in the realm of mathematics, if one equals two, then all the numbers don't exist. So, so that's just crazy. Uh, my attorneys went back and forth with them a little bit. Well, I went back and forth with my attorneys a lot. Then my attorneys got back and forth with them. It wasn't really happening, and so I wrote up a mathematical proof of just how ridiculous what they were doing was in early 2022,
Mhm.
and they gave me a second acceptance because it was, they couldn't support that.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, I got a letter of withdrawal for the second notice of acceptance. And they this time they said that the language in the patent was too expansive, which is problematic because they actually dictated the language that they're objecting to
Mm.
during that year-ish of negotiation. What my attorneys had told me is that you write up your patent so it's too broad, and then you negotiate with them to get it narrower so
Hmm.
that it's still as broad as you can get, but it's not insane.
Right.
So we had gone through that process, and they had said, write it like this so it won't mean the stuff that it's not allowed to mean. And then at that point, like, 3 years, 3.5 years later, they said, well, this language that, we told you to write means the thing that, we told you it wouldn't mean. It's like, well, even if you could make that interpretation, we've got the agreement where we all agreed that we're writing it that way, so it doesn't mean that. So like, what's going on?
What's going
So my
on? Right.
attorneys, yeah. So my attorneys talked to them and they're like, well, we understand that this is total BS, but we're under orders. Like, Q.C. has come down hard. They're not gonna move forward. We don't we don't agree with them. We don't even understand what they're saying. This is the best we could do. So we're just writing this down. We're going to sign our names to it. Like it's not worth our jobs to go fight
Yeah.
your fight for you.
Right.
So then it's the patent court. So the patent office is like the IRS. They've got their own internal, court-like system.
There are little
Uh,
processes. So yeah.
yeah. So we put together an appeal, sent it over to them, and July of this year, they they came back and they said, okay, we're going to look. The record at that point was around 500 pages long. They decided to look at four parts of it, around say 20%. Um, they decided to completely ignore the arguments around their violation of the law back in 2020. Um, they decided to reaffirm the one equals two argument because they said we hadn't made a counter argument because they decided to ignore the part of the record where we made the counter argument. Uh, they decided to dismiss our second counter argument just because, literally, like they're just like, we're not going to give a reason for this. We're just going to do it.
I'm
And
just gonna do
then,
it.
yeah, the bit where like they had said that these words would mean this, but then they were saying they mean the other thing. It's like, nah. Um,
Yeah. So,
and then,
on a real high level, tell our
sure.
audience on a real high level, tell our audience just basically what this battle is about, so they can get an understanding of what you're dealing with. Because this patent office it can get really tricky, as you're explaining. I've dealt with patents as well, and I know what you're going through.
Yeah, well, there's there's sort of three principal issues at hand here. Principal issue number one is does the federal government have the right to violate the law? Because that's the first thing that happened, basically.
Right.
Principal issue number two is the patent system well defined enough for there to be patents? Because this is an issue that's hit a lot of other people besides just me. But
Right.
we're getting down to these semantic arguments about, sort of what is, except that because I'm a computational mathematician and I've been very careful to couch everything in terms of these physically verifiable math things that all are real. Um,
Mhm.
in order to deny my patent, they would actually have to upend the existence of patents. They're not aware of this yet, but I was
Mhm.
very explicit in the latest salvo. And then the third issue at hand, is, you know, what's the status of modern technology on government itself? Because the people that I'm dealing with at the patent office who are empowered by America's future technological, direction
Yeah.
fail on the most basic forms of understanding of mathematical and computational technologies. They can't do the kind of analysis that you train people to do before you even start writing programs.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're putting forth arguments that sound plausible enough unless you understand that they're just totally meaningless.
Right.
And so, while in my opinion, they've gotten my case quite incorrect, even worse than that, they've evidenced no ability to get cases correct. And
Yeah.
there's thousands, tens of thousands of patents. There's trillions of dollars of assets that exist because patents exist.
Hmm.
If if even a small fraction of those are incorrectly being bruited about, then that's hundreds of billions of dollars that don't exist in our economy.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's the kind of thing that, starts shifting governments and societies around if
Yeah.
suddenly a few $100 billion vanishes.
Right.
Uh,
And this all started on because you submitted a patent and it basically got denied.
well, it got accepted, and then they started breaking the law in order to not accept it.
Ah, that's what I was trying to figure out, right? Because I know
Yeah.
you had talked about how it couldn't, but then I went, how did it and did not? But then I got it. So it got accepted. Then they were trying to retract it and say, oh, well, we were wrong. We can't do this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, got it.
And th the thing is, there is room within and around the patent system. There's a plausible argument to be made that this particular patent's valuable enough that it shouldn't belong to me just because I came up with it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
there are two mechanisms that are available to deal with that. One of them, not really in this case. The the U.S. government has classified patents during the processing before.
yeah.
And that's something that they could have done to me years and years and years ago before I started telling everybody what I was doing, which I started doing almost immediately.
Gotcha.
Uh, but they could have just said,
Mhm.
"Oh yeah, this is classified information. You're not allowed to talk about this anymore."
Right,
And
right. Yeah, to zip it right up and say you're
right,
done.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Here's your patent. That's great. Nobody can use this but you. You can't use it either,
yeah.
and you can't tell anybody about it.
Bye.
Go live your life. Right. Yeah. They could have done that. There are hundreds of patents to which that has been done.
Yeah,
Um, the other thing they can do is patents are property. You can sell them away and stuff like that. And the
sure.
takings clause allows government to, decide that privately held property properly belongs in government hands for whatever use. And in the early days of nuclear technology, that was actually used. In the later days of nuclear technology, they did the the other thing where they just were like, yeah, we're gonna make all that secret. But
Yeah,
uh,
we're just
at
making it all top secret. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
at Los
Yeah.
Alamos, in an attempt to sort of contain nuclear technology, they got the scientists to invent a bunch of things and then bought all the inventions from them.
And
Uh,
buy the inventions and then
yeah,
patent
so
those. Yeah.
right, so that they would hold all the patents, and
Yeah.
that they can like it has nothing to do with me. They can say, oh, okay, this is an important idea. It has to be patented because we can't find any reason not to do that.
Yeah.
But this Noah Healy character, is not
He's not
part of the
privy to that.
team. Yeah, yeah. So we need to control it. So they could just use the takings clause. Uh,
Yeah.
but but that would involve something very different than whatever it is that's actually going on.
Yeah.
Um, a point that I've been making and sort of made during the delay. So they just filed for delay. So they would have had to actually file their case about 10 days ago, but now they have until January 10th.
January 10th.
The for, for me to have encountered the number of sort of critically important judges in the patent system who can't do basic arithmetic. Um, Either a large majority of the people involved in making the important technological decisions for America can't do basic arithmetic,
Can't do
uh,
it. Yeah. It's amazing.
or I sort of won a, negative lottery ticket where some sort of 1 in a million-ish or worse chance of just got the only three guys that couldn't do arithmetic.
Yeah.
Or what's actually sort of the least damaging is that there's actually some nefarious, intent behind their decision to break the law and now decision to come up with ridiculous arguments to try to justify having broken the law.
Right. That's
But
crazy, isn't it?
I don't have the investigative resources to
Right.
dig into a federal agency with
No.
like 13,000 employees and figure
Yeah.
out what they're up to.
Right. So let's talk about this in closing here. So what are your expectations in the next year or two? Where do you hope to be? Do you hope this will be closed up in a year or two, or what are your thoughts on going forward with this?
Well, so there are a handful of people that are operating the system under an open source license overseas. And I'm continuing to search out the possibilities of finding people who
Gotcha.
are probably overseas that would like to start one. I'd be happy to start one inside the United States as well, also under
Right.
sort of open source auspices. But
Gotcha.
that limits the amount of sort of property right that can exist and how much
Mm.
power I can offer and influence these kinds of projects.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of prong one, and that's something I've been chipping away at while going through this.
Hmm.
The other side of things is that we may well see some very significant shifts in patent system as a result
Patent
of
system.
this.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
definitely intrigued by that because I want to talk to you after this about patents because I have an issue that I would love to run by you. I'm intrigued. Thank you.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but that if I can, get a federal judge or a panel of federal judges to understand what's at issue and sort of do the right thing here, then that would not only grant me the patent, which would be a pretty big step forward, but grant me the patent because it would be acknowledged that there's now an available mechanism to make the economy function better in a
Yeah.
highly public fashion.
Right.
Uh, and there would be a more concrete set of understandings about what would and would not be patentable.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's my entire point is that they're they have this they call it a a two-step process to determine patentability, but step two has two prongs, and prong B of step two has two phases. So you tell me whether that sounds like two steps to you or not. That's what two
Right,
steps in
exactly.
government sounds like. Uh,
Right,
but from a sort of mathematical physics point of view, all of their statements can actually be viewed in very concrete ways, except that they never do that.
yeah,
And so part of my argument is that you either have to start doing that, which creates objective standards that we can actually function off of,
right,
or you just have to admit that this is some kind of, crony, you know, criminal system where friends of the court
right.
get trillions of dollars and
Yeah,
inventors no role.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's possible outcomes is that the federal government could declare that, patents are real, but they're also a criminal enterprise.
Right. Well, I would love to bring you back on as get the updates as we go through with this because this is interesting. I like to keep in touch with you and follow up with this because I like this process you're going through, and I think it could help all of society, man. This is good.
I
Yeah,
very much hope so. I'd love to follow up with
yeah,
you, and yeah, hopefully as early as next month,
yeah.
there'll
That's
be
awesome.
there'll be at least some news,
Some
and
update.
I don't know. I think the courts move relatively quickly.
Okay.
It remains to be seen. The patent office has already gotten a 1 month delay, and that just happened at the clerk level. I just got a notice yesterday. With a change of administration, I'm assuming the
Hmm.
current director stepped down, and so they now have
Yeah.
an acting director who is now technically the guy I'm suing,
Yeah.
because that's how
Now,
it
do you have a
works.
website that we can reach out to follow everything on, or Instagram, or do you have social media?
I do have some social media. My most active social media is on LinkedIn. I'm Noah
Okay.
Healy on LinkedIn, uh,
Gotcha. I'll have to check you out. I'll
and
get you on LinkedIn. Absolutely.
yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
And that actually, I probably should file some of my stuff. I've got some pretty spicy things I've sent to the court.
Yeah,
That
would
that
love to
might
see
be
some of it.
decent LinkedIn
Yeah.
content.
See, absolutely. Well, Noah, thanks for coming on, man, and sharing your story. I think it was very technical, very intense. And I want to further this conversation as you go along with this and keep following because I think you have a lot here that you can offer to people who want to maybe apply for a patent or somebody like me who had some issues with a patent who I'm trying to still figure out if I should move forward with something like that. And I think you're the guy that can help me make that decision. And I'll talk to you about it. Appreciate it.
Okay,
Yeah. Noah, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate it, man. And we'll talk soon.
absolutely.
Thanks, sir. Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Q.A.C. Team podcast with your host, Charles Luttrell. Connect with us on the web at QACteam.com, TikTok at Q.A.C. Team, Facebook and Instagram at QAC.team. Thanks for your support.